What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards, old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. This week on Not Your Average Meta, we're bringing you another fun game we recorded down at the Hobby Horse featuring your favorite deck pilots. We'd also like to shout out our second full-time channel sponsor for Season 3 of the Hobby Horse. If you're ever in the Central Illinois area, be sure to stop in and check out the store as well as saying hi to Martin. This week's matchup features Foil playing his mono-black zombie generator Ghoulcaller Gisa, Gavin playing the OG Proliferate commander Atraxa Praetors Voice, Foggerl playing his mono-white Spirit Tribal commander Katilda Dawnhart Martyr, and Eric playing the Rakdos god Mogis, god of slaughter. Now that we have our fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Gavin plays a command tower, Fog plays a plains. Eric plays a Bajuka Bog, exiling Gavin's non-existent graveyard before he then plays a Mana Crypt and a cast a Mind Crank. Foil plays a Swamp. Gavin plays a Bountiful Promenade, and on his end step, Fog casts a Spiritual Visit to create a 1/1 Spirit token. Fog plays a War Room for turn to cast a Strict Proctor. He then goes to combat and swings his spear at Eric for 1 damage. Eric loses his Crypto on his upkeep and takes 3 damage. He then draws a card and casts a Dark Confidant before playing a land. Foil plays another Swamp for turn, then pays to suspend a Profane Tutor. Gavin plays a Morphic Pool for turn to cast Vraska's Fall. This then has each of his opponents sacking a creature and gaining a poison counter. Fog plays a Hall of Heliod's Generosity, then he pays to cast a Takasi's Welcome. On his upkeep, Eric takes 3 more damage from his Crypt before he then draws for turn. He then plays a Marsh Flats before he then pays to crack it in order to go get an untapped Blood Crypt, which he uses to help cast his commander Mogis. On his upkeep, Foil mills 2 cards and loses 2 life before he then takes a counter off his tutor and draws for turn. He then plays a Swamp and casts a Foulmire Knight and a pair of really fast boots, which he then chooses to equip to his knight. Gavin loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and then draws for turn. He then plays an Arid Mesa, then cracks it, milling a card before getting a land from his library. Gavin then casts Tezzeret's Gambit in order to draw 2 more cards and proliferate his opponent's poison counters. Fog loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and then draws for turn. He then plays a Gaia Sanitarium and casts Michiko's Reign of Truth, which he uses to target his Proctor, giving it +2/+2. Fog then goes to combat, attacking Gavin for 3 damage, making him mill 3 more cards. On his upkeep, Eric takes 3 damage from his Crypt before he then draws for turn. He then casts a Rampaging Ferocidon. Foil loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and removes the last counter off his tutor. This then has him casting it and going to get a card from his library. He then draws for turn and plays a Swamp before casting Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia, which creates him a Decayed Zombie on his end step. Gavin loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. He then taps out to cast his commander Atraxa, which has Eric paying to have him lose a life. Gavin then mills a card and proliferates the poison counters on his end step. Fog loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. He then targets his Proctor with his Saga trigger again and casts a Ghost Shintai of Shared Purpose. Fog then goes to combat, attacking Foil for 4 damage, having him mill 4 cards. On his upkeep, Eric takes 3 damage from his Crypt before he draws for turn. He then plays an Urborg before swinging his Dinosaur at Fog for 3 damage, having him mill 3 cards. Eric then casts a Damnation, and in response, Foil casts Village Rites, sacking his zombie token and drawing 2 cards. Foil loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. He then plays a Swamp before casting Sign in Blood, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life, before milling 2 more cards. Foil then casts Vizier of the Scorpion, amassing a zombie token before he then equips his Vizier with his Greaves. Gavin loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. He then plays a Windswept Heath, cracking to go get a land, and mills another card. Gavin then casts a Bloom Tender and a Norn's Decree. Fog loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. His Saga then transforms into Portrait of Michiko, which allows him to draw another card. Fogg then finally plays his second Plains, which allows him to cast his commander, Katilda. On his upkeep, Eric finally wins a Crypto and draws for turn. He then plays a Luxury Suite before he casts a Massacre Worm. This then wipes all the creatures off the board and has each of his opponents losing an ample amount of life and causes them all to mill more cards once again. Foil loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. He then plays a Swamp before tapping out to cast a Caged Sun, naming black when it enters play. Gavin loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. He then casts Ixal, Sign of Atraxa, and passes. Fogg loses 2 life, mills 2 cards, and draws for turn. He then plays a Command Beacon before paying to put an enchantment back on top of his library with his Haul. Fogg then casts a Kami of Ancient Law, which has him then drawing the card he put on top of his library. Eric wins another Crypt Roll on his upkeep and draws for turn. He then casts a Fleshbag Marauder, which has each player sacking a creature, and in response, Fogg sacks his Kami to destroy the Mindcrank. Eric then goes to combat and hits Fogg for 6 damage with his worm before passing. Foil loses 2 life and draws for turn. He then pays enough to cast his commander, Ghoulcaller Gisa, who he then equips with his Greaves. Foil then casts Gary in order to drain the table for 4 life while he then gains 12. Gavin loses 2 life and draws for turn. He then plays a Flagstones for turn before exiling a card from his hand in order to cast a Chrome Mox. Gavin then recasts Atraxa and proliferates the poison counters on his end step. Fogg loses 2 life and draws for turn. He then casts the Fall of Lord Khanda, targeting Foil's Grey Merchant. In response, Foil pays to use his Gisa to sack Gary in order to create 3 2/2 zombie tokens. Fogg then casts a Twilight Drover and passes. Eric wins another Crypt Roll and draws for turn. He then goes to combat and swings his worm at Gavin. The Sin gives him another poison counter and Gavin takes his 6 damage. Eric then casts a Torment of Hellfire where X is equal to 5. Each opponent then sacks permanents or discards cards before they take the remaining damage. Foil loses 2 life and draws for turn before he then casts a Gravecrawler. He then casts a Basilisk Collar and chooses to equip it to a zombie token, which he then swings at Eric for 3 damage, gaining him 3 life. Gavin loses 2 life and draws for turn. He then plays a Scalding Tarn before casting Vraska, Betrayal Sting. Gavin then pays to sack his Tarn to go get a land from his library, before he then casts a Brainstorm. The Sin has him drawing 3 cards and putting 2 cards from his hand back on top of his library. He then uptakes Vraska in order to draw a card and lose a life, while he then proliferates all the poison counters before proliferating again on his end step. Fogg loses 2 life and draws for turn. He then plays a Plains before casting Daxos, Blessed by the Sun, and a Drug Skull Reinforcement, gaining a life. On his upkeep, Eric takes 3 damage from his Crypt before he draws for turn. He then casts a Necropotence before taking one for the team, swinging all his creatures at Gavin. Gavin then tries to block with Atraxa, and in response, Eric casts Sudden Spoiling, allowing him to take Gavin out of the game. On his end step, Foil pays to sack his Gravecrawler in order to make 2 more zombie tokens. Foil loses 2 life and draws for turn. He then plays his Swamp for turn and then recasts his Gravecrawler from his graveyard. He then goes to combat and swings all of his tokens at Eric. Eric then responds by paying 10 life into his Necropotence, going out on his own terms. On his end step, Fogg cracks his Command Beacon to put his commander back into his hand from his command zone, before he then draws for turn and plays another Plains. Fogg then scans the situation and realizes he won't be able to stop Foil's zombies next turn and concedes the game to Foil. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.